Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt, and you have reached Venus Unplugged. And what we do here is explore the archetype and the mysteries of Venus and her sidekick, Eros, the god of all relatedness. We look at myth and psyche's logic and dreams. What I've been exploring here is the inferior function, which is not such a great name, but it's astounding. The more you think you know something, and then you go back and look at it again, and lived a couple of more years and realized, ouch, knew nothing. So the inferior function is Jung created, I think it was 1923 or so, this typology of the four functions. But there's actually 8 functions, because each of the 4 functions has an extroverted and an introverted. But I shan't be going into that. Let's just stick with the scary stuff. And so the inferior function is the part of ourselves that we don't know anything about. So our superior function, let's say the intuitive. All right, so the intuitive is one who they kind of see it. They leap and they land. Their inferior function is the sensate, the facts. Well, how'd you get there? Well, I don't know. Just got there. So they can drive one another crazy. Now, we all have an inferior function. That is the least developed part of ourselves. And usually in the second adulthood, that's when the inferior function starts kicking in, because the superior function, kind of our go-to, how we handle, we're so slick and cool, yeah, I know, gets a little worn out, gets a little tired. And then suddenly something happens in our life where we have to start using the inferior function, or, we've insulted enough people, or, gotten enough divorces, or, failed miserably in school or something. We have to start looking, what is going on here? Or, even more important, in our everyday relationships, where we have these big blowouts, and you walk away and it's like, what was that about? You inadvertently stepped on somebody's inferior function, or they're on yours, and you can't even recall quite what took place. All right. So it's kind of like animal instinct. We're born more towards one than the other. Okay. Now the functions, and once again, the first is the extrovert and the introvert. So that doesn't have anything to do with shyness. That has to do with, let's say, America is an extroverted thinking country. So that's why we do all our acting out right in everybody's face, and we've got it on television and radio, but the inferior function is feeling. We're not aware of other countries' feelings, or that that their beliefs or their structure, their manners, they can get insulted. You may not understand why, but you better understand it's insulting. So this happens in every day in our life. Now, a child is born, and they're going to have a natural tendency towards one of the 4: intuition and sensation, thinking and feeling. But if they're born into, let's say they're born into a basically sensate family, and they are introverted feeling, Now, what the child will do, they will repress that feeling because they're not going to get anywhere and nobody's going to understand them anyway. They will cope and develop the sensate, the facts. So, everybody's an engineer, and so they become an engineer, but not a very good one. And it certainly is not floating their boat. It is not the thing they really love. Now, sometimes the setup is, somebody in the family has to be the fool. So people and members of the family, there's their early stages. So one's main function is the tendency in families. Families will distribute functions. One member is the introvert, one's the extrovert, one's the clown, one's the engineer, one's the prophet. And the others, they give up their function that they've assigned to another because that member can do it much better. There's only one minor setback. You don't learn anything. And it's going to come in the second half of life to be dealt with. And what we don't know, we don't know. Now, what's fascinating and profound is that in the inferior function, it is a treasure chest. It is virgin territory. There is a lot of libido and a life force in that. We don't know how to get the treasure. We don't know what it's about. It comes in strange ways, but it is there. So it's important if we can start just looking like, what is, or even very often, we have no idea what our inferior function is unless we're tripping over it a million times. Or someone doesn't know what your inferior function is. It's easy. And you want to strangle them because you're a moron. You don't have any information within. You just start pushing buttons and figure something will happen if you haven't fainted. I'm that way with computers. I mean, I have kind of a general knowledge, through sweat and tears. But, it's like, you just do this and do that. And it's like, really? Well, that's not going to happen. And that's also why we hire people. If we're not good at something, do yourself a favor. If you're not good at sensate, make sure you have a bookkeeper. Because you're going to suck at doing your taxes and everything else. It's not worth it. So wherever our inferior function is, we know, can we develop it slow and hard, battle scars. But in the meantime, understand you don't have anything in that area of understanding, and you get help with it so that you can begin to understand. So let's say in marriage, what Jung points out is that one tends to marry the opposite type. And then, again, they realize, he marries, and then he thinks, for the moment, that he's free from the despicable task of confronting his own inferior function. This is one of the great blessings and sources of happiness in early stages of marriage. Suddenly, the whole weight of the inferior function is gone. One lives in a blessed oneness with the other, and every problem is solved. Except. But if one of the partners dies or gets into consciousness, which is a form of death in some ways, or the need comes up for one of them to develop the inferior function instead of just leaving those sections of life to the other, that's when the trouble starts, which is interesting. He was so easy to be with. Yeah, that got tired of, picking up after you, or, I got tired of whatever one gets tired of. But it's easy for you. That doesn't mean that I have to do it for 12 people. So, when we really start looking at this, the best way that we learn anything is observe life. See Or, you're yakking it up with a friend and they're telling you a story and you can start understanding, oh, now that makes sense, because they pull the same shit on you. Now, it may not mean that much because it doesn't tap your inferior function, but you certainly can understand why the other person blew up. Or you can understand why your friend is totally clueless and just asked you to carry their inferior function for them. So depending on the person, if you're striving towards consciousness, you can say, no, I am not carrying your inferior function. That's your job. You need to do that. And I love you, and it's a disservice. I'll help you. I'll walk along with you. I'll be your coach. I won't abandon you. But you got to do it, because you need that. Because that is, there's four functions. It's like a mosaic, see? And that mosaic, it's an intrinsic mosaic within our beings. And in order to have individuation, which is one's wholeness, everything's got to be operating to some degree. And especially the parts we don't know about ourselves, because those are the parts that every stranger knows, or those are the parts that, we know because somebody gets so, freaked out and uber sensitive, and you can't talk to them, and and you can't find any words because they just blow up. So there were two possibilities in nature, in the jungle, same as with human beings. We either learn to defend against keeping things away from us, or keep while we're building our lives, or we pour ourselves into it and overcome and conquer it. Now, those are two basic introverted, extroverted that live in animal kingdom, and us too. So the behavior of the inferior function, it's like, if you want to get a sense of it, in fairy tales, right? In fairy tales, there is this function, like a king, and he has 3 sons, and then he likes the 2 elder ones because they're like good old dad. But the youngest is regarded as a fool or an idiot, right? The king then sets task for the sons, and they have to go find the water of life, or the most beautiful girl, or chase away secret enemies every night, and steals the horses or the golden apples out of the royal garden. So generally the 2 elder sons set out. So that's the superior function and the auxiliary function right there. So they set out doing what they do best, which is be heroes. And they can't figure out shit, but they're heroes. And they're loved by the father. And then the third saddles his horse, and everybody laughs and tells him he should stay at home. He's an idiot, and he should stay by the stove where he belongs. But it is he who usually performs the great task. Because the fourth figure, the third son, not the third son, but the fourth figure in the setup, according to myths, different superficial qualities. So sometimes he's the youngest, and sometimes he's a bit of an idiot, and sometimes he's a complete fool, and there are different versions, but he is always in some category. So when the fool becomes the hero, or the fool's mask, everything reverses itself. Why does that happen in fairy tales? Because it's pointing to the inferior function. So we know at the very beginning of the story that it concerns more than the 4 functions. For the fool is the archetypal religious figure, embracing more than only the inferior function. He implies a part of the human personality, or even of humanity, which remained behind and therefore still has the original wholeness of nature. So if we study individual cases like about the inferior function, one can see the inferior function tends to behave after a manner of a fool or a hero or the divine fool or an idiot hero, because it's not caught up into covering up what it doesn't know. It doesn't know anything. So it's going to be a good day. It's going to be a great task. I don't know. So there's an innocence in that. Might consider a beginner's luck. Certainly, not allowing the ego to kick in because it knows. Where the fool says, goes where angels wouldn't dare. Doesn't know any better. The world laughs. And yet, it's a symbol of great wisdom. So the fool hero, or the divine fool, or the idiot hero, he represents the despised parts of the personality. The ridiculous part and the unadapted part, but also that part which builds up the connection with the unconscious and is therefore holds the secret key to the unconscious totality of the person. So in a sense, the inferior function makes a bridge to the unconscious and then also to the collective unconscious. So, and it's always directed towards the unconscious and the symbolic world. So that's its connection. Like, for instance, like an introverted thinking type has an inferior extroverted feeling function. And its movement will be towards outer objects and outer people. But such people will have a symbolic meaning for the other person, and being carries the symbols of the unconscious. But they just see it like as symbolic. They don't realize it's a person. So it's kind of, there's this quality of unrelatedness. It could be pretty insulting. Okay? They don't mean it. It's just like, oh, I didn't think that would bother you. Of course you didn't think it bothered you. You didn't feel it. You assumed it didn't bother you. You didn't feel that. So that's what they thought. They didn't feel. How many arguments has that been in people's life? So the general outline for the inferior function belongs to the fact that it is slow in contrast to the superior function. The snappy answers, and yeah, I could do that. Let me just jump right in. All right. And Jung calls it the infantile and the tyrannical, and with good reason. Because we have to go into this, in detail. And as once I thought, this will be an episode or two, but I think we're going to be, this is the summer of the inferior function, because there's a lot of gold here. And it's very practical wisdom, common sense wisdom. So one of the great troubles of the inferior function is its slowness, which is one reason why people hate to start work on it. The reaction of the superior function comes out quickly, and the reaction of this, it's just like it's there, and it's well adapted, and it's groovy groove. Why many people have no idea what their inferior function really is. For instance, thinking types have no idea whether they have a feeling or what kind of feeling it is. They have to sit for half an hour and meditate as to whether they have feelings about something, and if so, what are they? If you are a thinking type, what he feels, he generally either replies with a thought or gives a quick conventional reaction, like, that's your karma. And If you then insist on knowing what he really feels, he does not know. He really doesn't know. And you don't know what you don't know. Now, we can have compassion towards this, because you're asking a person to do the supernatural. Now, if they've got a little bit of an idea of what's going on, they can say, I'm a little day late and $1 short with this. Or it could be a joke, but it's when we don't know and we can get our feelings hurt because the response is weird, because they don't really come from that heart or the guts, right? Or let's say an intuitive fills out a tax form. He needs a week, where other people can take a day. He simply can't do it. And he does do it. And if he does do it accurately and in the right way, it's going to take forever. It's just what it is. So if you know thy inferior self, because you're either going to marry it or you're certainly going to meet it in the second adulthood. Or, when you begin to discover and ask questions, so you may realize, dang, I'm a feeling type, but I was born into a sensate type, and there was no room for the feeling little boy. So we had to learn to adapt. Everybody was brilliant and practical and went into finance, and there sits the little poet and has to learn and always feels confused. So this is part of what we sought out. And it can't be skipped. We just can't hop over it. It's slow and it's tedious and it's many examples. So this stage, if we lose patience with people and just go like, well, the hell with it, and then we give up, and then it's hopeless. So it just means that they cut out the fourth function and they replaced it by some artificial mechanism or by a crutch. Can't be speeded up. They've got to work on it. But we can recognize it and really have some compassion for, man, no wonder they just say those trite things. And you don't have to take offense to it because you just know it's like nothing home in that area yet. So it's not that they don't feel. Of course they feel. It's just they feel it like when they're by themselves or something. And they have the feeling. And then when it's the appropriate moment, when you're standing in front of the person where the feeling could kind of do you well, they don't have it to give. And then you see them as cold. Not cold. Not at all. They're just do it in a different way. And another aspect of the inferior function is also connected with unadaptiveness or primitiveness. It's touchy and it's tyranny. So most people, when their inferior function is in any way touched, it becomes terribly childish. They can't stand the slightest criticism, and they always feel attacked. So here they're uncertain of themselves, and that naturally they tyrannize everybody around them because everybody has to walk very carefully. Does any of this sound familiar? Okay, so if you want to say something about another person's inferior function, say with flowers, not really. Although that might work, it's you're working on eggs. And they cannot stand to be criticized there. Like I said, my inferior function is the computers say password and I'm frozen. And can feel criticized if somebody says, or that I'm dumb, And someone says, but it's easy. No. I learn it. I must learn it. It's important. And also, part of this, too, and how I kind of got back to looking more carefully at these inferior functions, in writing, it's like, wait a second, I really want to start devoting writing, but if I don't have a sense of what the inferior function is in a character, where's the plot? I'll skip over that. Needless to say, I'm not going to be writing about any engineers anytime soon, okay? And I do like the otherworldliness of it all, because it's not a too intuitive feeling, but I got to come back to some facts, this is used for our art and our communication, to have this knowledge. So when somebody really gets, absolutely off the hook, they just flip out. It's like dollar to donuts. You stepped into that place and didn't realize it. So, but you can't shoot criticism, because that only gets them absolutely bewildered and emotional, and then the situation is absolutely ruined and there's no coming back to it. Unless they have some consciousness about this. We can discuss it, or at least consider who that masked bandit was. So let's say somebody is a feeling type and they write a paper for school, and a thinking type looks at it and just makes like this little correction, because it's just for the thinking type, there wasn't a logical transition was lacking. That person, the feeling type, will flip out. They'll want to burn it. It's no good. They're being criticized. How awful. And all you're saying is, wait a second, if you just put one sentence between these two paragraphs and make that transition, it will all pull together. Now, a thinking type is going to notice that. A feeling type isn't, because they just died 1,000 deaths to write this paper. Meaning to formulate a logical sequence of what happens. They can talk forever about feelings, but it may not have any logical sense. And but usually you'll have a dream when something is when you touch the inferior function. There's going to be let's say you have a dream and you see red flowers, right? Red is always feelings. Okay. So we will continue with this because it's fascinating, and people are really responding well to it, which is good, so it's being helpful. And this is the summer of the inferior function. God knows we are tapping it enough in this world, right? Right. So, till we meet again. So this is like midnight. I thought, let me speak now because I want to go do some writing. So till next week, and I will be taking a lot of the Blog Talk episodes off of Blog Talk, and I'll be putting them on to, not I, my webmaster will be doing that, not I. And it's going to go on YouTube so that there can be a greater audience. So let people know if you're finding this good. Even if you're finding it bad, let them know. Maybe they might find it good. Maybe your inferior function of the inferior function. Okay, so till next week, bye-bye.